So he's taking some time off, and the next time we see anything about The Undertaker is in the May 30th edition of The Observer. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling, it's written, Brian Lee has changed his hair color and started growing a small beard to get ready for his evil Undertaker role. Brian Lee was backstage preparing for his Undertaker evil twin role. Based on television, it appears he'll be managed by Ted DiBiase. So we're tuning up for the Underfaker here, and he debuts at television tapings on May 24th in Canton, Ohio, and then the following day he's in Erie, Pennsylvania. He does have Ted DiBiase as a heel manager, and he's wrestling as The Undertaker. Meltzer writes, Lee's been made up to look like The Undertaker with his hair dyed reddish and grown long and stringy and wearing makeup, even practicing copying Undertaker's walk. Based on reports we got from the shows, there were definitely some fans, but they were in the minority, who believed that Lee was the original Undertaker. There were loud BS chants in at least one of the cities, which will have to be dubbed over before this airs. Supposedly, most of the fans realize once the match starts, this isn't the original Undertaker. And when he does interviews, it gives it away to all those that were there live. But even so, even with DiBiase, he received a lot more cheers than boos just because of the entrance music. However, we're told on interviews they're going to dub Mark Calloway's voice onto the track, so it creates confusion among the fans. So he will have Calloway's voice on the interviews. When the match is there, supposedly the angle will be something to the effect of the heel announcer will claim it's the real Undertaker, and the face announcer won't be sure. Lee's hair is in front of his face during the entire match, but at the finish, he lifts his hair up for a brief minute with the idea being, if you weren't sure, now you're sure. Naturally, this will lead to The Undertaker confronting him to an Undertaker versus Undertaker match, most likely at SummerSlam. We're told the long-term deal is for Lee to turn on DiBiase and the two Undertakers be together. So there's some rumor and innuendo for you from the Wrestling Observer newsletter, but what say you?
God, I don't even know where to start. The funny thing is that because somebody wrote it down that it is forever believed as fact. Well, first of all, with Undertaker being out for a while, the discussion becomes, how do we bring Undertaker back? What do we do? Who is the opponent? Who's the right guy for the Undertaker to come back? Now, the natural thing is to do something with Yokozuna, but weren't necessarily really ready for that just yet. And the discussion was, who do we have ready for the Undertaker? And somebody might have made a comment along the lines of, well, it would be nice if we had another Undertaker, type character to face the Undertaker. And Brian Lee and Undertaker were good friends. And I'd recently been around Brian, and people had mistaken Brian for the Undertaker when we were out. Because they both had the same hair, they had the same beard. And I started laughing. I said, what if we had the Undertaker? What do you mean? So what if we make another Undertaker? And I got pictures. I had Brian send pictures in and all this stuff and called Taker. I said, what do you think about this? The idea being that you announce that the Undertaker is returning, and the announcement is made by the guy who originally, financed the Undertaker coming into the WWE, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase.
Right.
And by God, I'm bringing him back. I've got the Undertaker, and he, I've bought him. He's bought and paid for. So without the comparison of Mark Calloway standing next to Brian Lee, a lot of people thought that Brian Lee was the Undertaker. So we had a tattoo expert come in, and we had tattoos put on Brian Lee's arm, the exact same tattoos as the Undertaker. As a matter of fact, Jerry Lawler sat at the makeup station with Brian Lee and drew and put color in the tattoos because we didn't think that the tattoo artists that had put on the temporary tattoos, that they looked good enough. And Lawler sat there and said, I can fix that. And Lawler sat there with a pen and made the tattoos on Brian Lee's arms.
Wow.
And it was, I mean, you talk about a great, Jerry Lawler is a magnificent artist, but Lawler did a lot of that work. So the idea was you bring back The Undertaker, and Brian Lee never cut a fucking promo, Dave Meltzer. The voice dub was always The Undertaker in the live houses everywhere. Brian never opened his mouth and cut promos. That was always an Undertaker dub. And, you know, that's why I get so upset when I hear that name come out of your mouth, because he gets it from somebody who was there, who sends him a report, and all of a sudden it's fact. But we thought, well, shit, if we could hide it enough, we even talked about doing the matches in like a purple hue so that you could disguise them even more.
Wow.
So that you never really knew. And that when DiBiase came out, man, it was so disguised. You thought, shit, I'm looking at The Undertaker. There was even thought at times about having The Undertaker play The Underfaker. You know what I mean? So you're really confused now. You got Mark Calloway out there who is playing yeah. So the problem was that in between our times, Taker had gotten more tattoos, the real Taker. So it's like, shit, we've already debuted this other guy. He's got the one arm, and people hadn't seen the other tattoos.
Nobody thought to call Undertaker and say, don't get any more tattoos.
You know, when Taker got his first tattoo, I told him, dude, you probably just ruined your career right there. Why would you do that? Don't get any, whatever you do, don't get any more tattoos. That was my advice to him in Binghamton, New York. I'll never forget it till he listened to me. But the idea was a few weeks for the Undertaker to be out there.
Hang on, let's circle back. Why did you think he would end his career if he got a tattoo?
Well, because it was a tattoo of himself with the skull and crossbones and everything, and I thought, you know, now you can't do anything else. If this Undertaker thing doesn't work out for you, kid, you're now branded with this fucking tattoo. What are you thinking, you big dumb red-headed son of a bitch? Yeah. Needless to say, he didn't take my advice. And I think, you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think it's worked out all right for him.
It worked out okay. So I think
it worked out okay.
The plan was to spend a few weeks with Undertaker.
The plan was to spend a few weeks with the Undertaker. And like I said, we even talked about switching him out and actually having the real Undertaker be the Undertaker a few times to really fuck people up. We didn't do that. We just had Brian Lee out there the whole time. But the idea was never to have them fucking be a team and do all that other bullshit after turning babyface on Ted DiBiase. That's just somebody saying. But here's what Meltzer can say after we didn't do that.
Plans
well,
changed.
They changed plans.
Yeah.
No, that was never the plan. But as we got into it, as always, we had Brian Lee come to the studio and get in the ring and work with Undertaker to get his mannerisms down pat as close as we could. And until, for those who know, they knew. For those who didn't, they just weren't sure. And without Undertaker there to compare, I don't think as many people as Dave Meltzer would like to believe were not fooled, if I'm saying that right.
Well, here's the
I think
deal.
More people were fooled than not.
A couple years prior to this, you know, people were saying, oh, that's not the real Ultimate Warrior. He's dead. This is the second one. So, you know, right. It is what it is.
So it is what it is in reverse. But as we got into it and we did the whole build up to find the Undertaker, we brought Paul Bearer back. That was the first time that we wanted to say, hey, that's not the real Undertaker.
Right.
And then the search was on to find the real Undertaker. And this was probably some of this was my absolute greatest experience ever with a celebrity from outside of the wrestling world to come into our world. And that was working with Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah.
Find the Undertaker.
I was going to get there, but let's just talk.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
No, you go with where you're going, and we'll get to it when you're ready.
I want to talk about the decision for it to be Brian Lee. There's lots of rumor and innuendo that he is somehow loosely related to The Undertaker. Just set that record straight.
No, I don't think so at all.
Okay. They did a Superstars taping on June 21st in Pennsylvania. And on the taping, Paul Bearer did an interview saying he's been in contact lately with The Undertaker. On the Raw episode that aired on June 27th, Gorilla Monsoon accidentally refers to Brian Lee as the new Undertaker. And apparently there were already mentions on television of the pizza boxes. Even though the fans aren't supposed to know at this point that there are two of them. How does this happen?
He was the new Undertaker. We had already started Paul Bearer coming out questioning that fact.
But I'm saying at this point,
Monsoon being Monsoon and being a babyface announcer wants to be the first one to tell you it's a new Undertaker.
I get you on that. I guess what I'm saying is they're delivering pizzas by this point with both Undertakers on there advertising SummerSlam, and you haven't even seen the real Undertaker return to confront the new Undertaker on TV. But if you ordered a fucking Works pizza or a Meatza, then you knew the main event.
Yeah.
No problem with that?
What it was. No. He figured that would be minuscule in comparison to the overall scope of things.
Well, they wanted the $250,000.
Damn right.
Okay. King's Court happens on the August 2nd edition of a Superstars taping. And here we have Ted DiBiase and Paul Bearer out, and DiBiase calls his Undertaker out, who then starts choking Paul Bearer. The lights go out, and then they flicker back on. Bearer's outside the ring, and Mark Calloway is inside the ring for the first time since January. And he squashes Quang. So I knew you'd correct that. I know you like that. Then Luger wrestles the evil Undertaker, who sits up after Luger's moves, but finally, when Luger caught him in the torture rack, Bam Bam Bigelow had to interfere for the DQ. The good Undertaker does a walkout, and the two Undertakers do a stare down before the evil one backs out and leaves. And then, of course, the Undertaker we all know and love squashes Bigelow with a choke slam in just 1 minute and 3 seconds. The next week in the Observer, or 2 weeks later, we see Dave Wright. The headline angle, Undertaker versus Undertaker, has gotten so cold that the reports we've gotten are that it will be pronounced dead after the first and only match. From what we can understand and what seemingly seems to be confirmed by hints dropped by Vince McMahon on the live Sunday call-in show on the USA Network, which was a major disaster, by the way, are that this angle, talked about 2 months ago as being the resurrection of big box office for the company, is officially being dropped. McMahon said, almost matter-of-factly, that it would be the one and only meeting of the two Undertakers, and after that show, there would be only one. Whether it was the Leslie Nielsen skits, which I thought were entertaining, but I couldn't see it adding any sales, were falling flat, or simply the idea of copying the most over and unique character of the 90s only dilutes the impact of the original, it's pretty well acknowledged that this idea was born dead. From what we've been told, the decision was made to remove Brian Lee from house show bookings for September, and he would return sometime very soon under a new name with a new look and as a new character. So let's talk about how that comes about, because as a kid, every kid I know was into this, Undertaker versus Undertaker. And Undertaker versus Yokozuna had been drawing awesome. Why did this not rub Vince the right way?
I don't think he was totally convinced with Brian's work being that convincing in the ring doing Undertaker. So the thought of, and just for the record, he says that there was never any plans to do more than one. So it's not like, oh my God, he killed it. It was always the plan to do a one-off. This was Undertaker's return. It was a way to bring him back and have one match, one attraction, one time.
Well, But Goldberg was brought back for one match, one attraction, one time at Survivor Series, and that went well. So because it went well, they stretched it out.
But it would be different if we were bringing Mark Calloway back as The Undertaker. It was, the whole idea was simply for Undertaker to re-enter and to have a dragon to slay him, and then be on to the next thing. It was simply an attraction, and that's all it ever was meant to be. It was never meant to be anything more beyond SummerSlam.
What type of deal would you guys have negotiated with Brian Lee here? Would it have just been, we're going to bring you in for 3 months? Or
yeah, and if it work out well, then we might have something for you on down the road in a different gimmick, but we'd have to change your look and do something else with you down the road.
Meanwhile, over at WCW, the August 24th Clash of the Champions is Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, and it's the highest rated television special on TBS in all of 1994. It gets a 4.5 rating for the first hour, a 7.7 rating for the second hour, and it's the highest rated pro wrestling show on cable since the 1990 Mountain Madness Clash of the Champions, which drew a 5.0. And probably the second most widely viewed pro wrestling match ever, behind Ric Flair and Lex Luger and Sting and Black Scorpion, also in 90. So WCW's business takes a real shot in the arm with this Hogan signing. Meanwhile, SummerSlam is on August 29th, and it's the first ever event at the United Center in Chicago, which Bruce just said was too fucking expensive for the WWF on our WrestleMania 13 episode, if you remember. But the WWF ran the first ever event there and drew a sellout crowd of 23,000 folks. Dave argues that there were reports that it was heavily papered and all over the radio the day of the show, saying that there were free tickets available at different shops. Meltzer does a poll, and everyone agrees the worst match on SummerSlam is Undertaker versus Undertaker. He writes, the WWF's lack of talent depth showed itself once again at SummerSlam. A well-produced show with a phenomenal title match, followed by possibly the worst main event in pay-per-view history. What do you think of that?
Fuck Dave Meltzer. And first of all, going back to your comment about the United Center, we did run the United Center, and the WrestleMania we were talking about took place after this event.
Correct.
We had run it, and it was way too expensive. We didn't like it, and we liked Rosemont for the ambiance and everything else, and it was a cheaper building to run. But as far, there's a lot of things, and it's real easy to sit behind your computer or your typewriter and judge when you've never taken a bump, you've never been in the ring, and you've never put your own balls on the line to promote something or actually produce something other than, like I said, sit behind your computer screen and sit there and critique and bitch and moan about somebody like Meltzer and these fake news people do. So fuck him and his goddamn opinion, because what they don't know is what did take place behind the scenes, and what they don't know is what we did have planned and what we didn't get to have come across, because the match, like I said, it was designed to be a one-off. It was designed to be a gimmick match. It was designed to simply bring Undertaker back and have him slay a dragon. The match, because Bret Hart and Owen Hart had a cage match earlier in the show that went 20 minutes heavy. So all of a sudden you have a match at the very end of the night with Undertaker and a guy who is nervous as shit, who in his mind is auditioning for a job, in Brian Lee, who has their match now condensed into roughly about 10 or 12 minutes, whatever the hell it was. So much of it was the entrance. So much of it was the pantomime. So much of it was the build that we didn't have time to tell because of things going longer earlier in the show. So, again, it sounds like I'm making excuses, and I am, because that's what happened, and shit happens. So it wasn't great. It wasn't the match of the year. It didn't do 4 stars or 6 stars in the fucking Tokyo Dome. I don't give a fuck. It was an attraction. It was meant to be an attraction. It was meant to be a way to bring Undertaker back and have him slay a dragon on top at a pay-per-view. And didn't accomplish that, didn't deliver, but there were extenuating circumstances that made that happen.
How hot was Undertaker at Brett when he walks through the back and knows that he went 20 minutes long and just slaughtered?
Pretty fucking hot. He was hot.
What's that sound like? Don't do an impression. Just tell me.
No, he was fucking hot. No, you know what? Nobody was there for the confrontation because no one wanted to be there. But Taker did go and speak to Brett. Just let him know, hey, he wasn't happy with it. I mean, well, I don't know. It wasn't heated. Taker's not that kind of a guy. But he did have a conversation with him that night. And no one was there, so no one was witness. Only people that know what happened in that is Undertaker and Brett.
Meltzer would write, what seemed like a cute idea materialized into watering down the drawing power of the company's top attraction. Another cute idea, like using Leslie Nielsen of the Naked Gun movies, and at this show, his sidekick George Kennedy, in search of the Undertaker, flopped just as bad, as the two were hampered by an incredibly vapid script. As if someone came up with the bones of an idea, but nobody had any of the meat, they did the idea anyway. When it was over, the show, even though it had a few great angles and one excellent match, came off due to the last impression as a lackluster major event. I'm of the opinion that if the Undertaker match had been put on in the third slot on the card, its impact at the end would have been minimal, and fans leaving with a cage match would have left on a much brighter note, and a thumbs-up ratio would have been far better. My only guess is that the Undertaker wouldn't bomb like it did, obviously, and they like to end shows with a babyface conquering all, and the cage match ended with the face getting destroyed at the end. But that mindset ended up leaving a show on a flat note rather than a high note. The natural comparison to the Clash a few days earlier, where the Clash had much more excitement and much more meaning. Ultimately, of course, the Undertaker won after 9 minutes and 10 seconds. Undertaker Mark Calloway won against Undertaker Bradley.
Well, Meltzer could take his thumb and shove it up his ass.
In the match, they do a 7-minute ring entrance with Paul Bearer coming out alone, and then the coffin that Calloway was buried in at the Royal Rumble was wheeled out by some hooded men, and inside the casket was...
Druids, pal, Druids.
Who played the Druids here? Just...
Fuck if I know, just guys.
It was me, Austin. However, that's what I was hoping you'd go for. However, in the casket was a giant urn, and when Bear opened the urn, we got a nice thunder and lightning show. Finally, Calloway showed up. The special effects was good, but it was done the minute the bell rang. One guy in the ultra slow motion has limitations. Two guys doing it kills the match. It didn't help that Lee seemed lost in the ring, and that the two didn't look enough alike, and the size difference was noticeable. It was as if everyone knew the ending once Calloway showed up. No heat at all. Even McMahon had to acknowledge it. Trying to get over the crowd was stunned into silence because there was no tension in the air, so it was just dull silence, not stunned silence. Lee used a chokeslam and a tombstone, but Calloway sat up both times. Calloway reversed the second tombstone, then delivered two more across Lee's arms and pinned him. He then rolled him into the casket, thereby killing the gimmick. Word we get is Lee will return with a new look as a biker character with no acknowledgement of this prior role. Leslie Nielsen and George Kennedy ended the show with a skit as weak as the match. -1 star. So, your thoughts on the match, the build-up, and Leslie Nielsen and George Kennedy, which I know you really enjoyed.
The match was horrible. But the match, had its limitations, and they had to chop a whole lot of it out that they had. The match was one of those that had to be laid out and tell a long story, and much longer than what it lasted going out there. And Brian probably was lost because what they had planned and what they had worked out prior to that, they were ad-libbing, and they were just trying to get through it and not have a finish take place as they were off the air. So we had to get the damn thing done. We didn't have a network at that time. We couldn't go over. We had to get done by 10:55 at night. So, yeah, it sucked. It wasn't great. But I'll stand by it. Hey, it was my story. If you don't like it, great. You didn't like it. It's not everybody's cup of tea. It was a story to bring the Undertaker back and to have an Undertaker versus Undertaker, the feeling being that the greatest foe of The Undertaker would be himself, looking at himself in the mirror and having to face the old evil Undertaker. Execution probably could have been better, but then again, that's Monday morning quarterbacking and hindsight being 2020. We had fun with it. We did what we wanted to do, and like I said, it was always intended to be a one-off and a way to bring Undertaker back. The Leslie Nielsen involvement, I thought that those skits leading up to it were some of the best stuff we'd ever done. They were clever. They were well done. They were well written, well produced by David Sahadi, and people to this day still talk about it. And Leslie Nielsen was an absolute pro in every sense of the word, from him being early on set and working with us to him going to the all-nude bar in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where all they wore were knee pads, and just being an all-around great guy. And to tell you what a great guy he was, George Kennedy, who's one of his best friends, we had no deal with George Kennedy. But Leslie Nielsen asked us to use George Kennedy that day because George was in a bad way at that point in his life. And he said, just use him, make him feel loved. He goes, I'd like to have him be a part of this. And Leslie Nielsen offered to pay George out of his pay. And Vince, of course, wouldn't do that. Vince paid George, and all was well. But I just was always impressed by that. And Leslie Nielsen's my favorite celebrity I ever worked with.
Wow, that's quite a statement right there.
Yep. He was great. But it was what it was, and it could have been better, but a lot of things could have been better. And shit happens sometimes.